going to nickname. Do this, please.
So we are starting the presentation of the unique in that kind report. None of the regions did such report, and we never did it before in this specific. This report called Shrinking Civic Space and Marginalized Communities in Eastern Europe and Central Asia 2025. And we set the system of collecting data from community and human rights experts from 10 countries. And this methodology is based on the civic questionnaire, but it is adapted to the needs of civil society who are specifically working on providing services to key populations, to people who have drugs, to people living with HIV, to sex workers and LGBT community. We are in unique situation because the behavior itself and our work and our provision of harm reduction or some services and our human rights activism to these groups also could be criminalized or stigmatized or somehow marginalized. That's why uniqueness of this report is about the not just the civic space, but civic space for this specific organizations. And I need to say that for me, these organizations are, if they are vulnerable, then it makes more vulnerability, it put more vulnerability on our key people and our beneficiaries, our communities on the ground. Because if harm reduction organization disappear, then thousands of people could not get access to health or protection. And that's rather specific risks for not only for civil society, for civic space, for freedoms, but also risks for health and life. We need to acknowledge that this report could not be developed without support and generous and very flexible and important support of Resilient Project by Elton John AIDS Foundation. And we value also support from the regional project Sustainability of Services for Key Populations in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, ISOS Empowering and Innovations, implemented by consortium of organizations and the leadership of Alliance for Public Health with support of Global Fund to fight HIV, AIDS and malaria. For us, it is important, and in this shrinking financial space for regional networks, so community organizations, for local leaders, this support is very important to make this report possible. So I guess with this, the only note which I have before going to the presentation and to first speaker, actually. Do we have first speaker? Samira. I could not see her. Then maybe we will start with Timur. Before going to the really presentation of the report of the report findings, I need to say that yesterday we marked 4 years of the full-scale invasion to Ukraine, and it's already 12 year of war in Ukraine and Russian invasion to Ukraine. And I need to say that we all understand that the Ukrainian army and all who support Ukrainian army fighting for human rights and democracy, and that's really important part of our fight. And partly one question which we asked our researchers, does it started this shrinking civic space? Was it allowed by the Russian aggression? is it connected? And we will have time to discuss. We have we scheduled the meeting for hour and a half, and hopefully we will have a lot of time to discuss. And if you have immediate question to us, then please write in the chat. So I guess that I'm giving the floor to Timur to present the report.
We'll have like 2 hours to do that, right?
No, you have maximum 15 minutes, and I'm switching on the telephone. Please.
Okay, so my question is like there will be a presentation, right? The PowerPoint slides sharing.
You want us to share?
Okay. So will I share or?
You can share.
If it's
I will make you the.
Please share, it will be easier to switch.
Yeah.
Okay, and I will be sharing in Russian or in English?
Doesn't matter, we have translation.
Yeah, I understand, but the slides themselves.
Doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. So then I will probably share the Russian because I will be speaking in English. So with your permission, I will share in Russian. Come on. I need to go to the, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see the, yeah, okay. Now I see it. All right, so first of all, greetings to everybody. I have to say that this is really a big moment for me because I was doing this work for last few months together with focal points in 10 countries, together with the Secretariat of Eurasian Harm Reduction Network, and also representatives of the other networks, regional networks, whose logos you can see on the screen. It was a tremendous undertaking. I have to say that I'm really happy that this kind of work has started. And hopefully it will be replicated in other regions. And in our region, it would be really interesting to see how things are evolving, because the trends we are seeing now are not really nice. And there is one trend which was not mentioned in the report, but we have this big country that likes setting trends. And the trend that they set is basically labeling activists as terrorists and extremists. So this is something that the rest of the countries don't have yet, but, well, they were the first ones to do the foreign agents. And here we go. We have a small epidemic starting of this kind of laws. Anti-propaganda, same thing. And these things, they are infectious. So I really hope that we're not going to see LGBTQI community labeled as extremist movement, like it was in Russia, and hopefully it will not continue to include the other communities already marginalized. And yet, some countries just think that it's just not enough. There has to be some more controls, protect their society. Anyway, so going forward, why this research was important? Well, first of all, because community-led organizations, they are recognized at multiple levels, except maybe in some countries, governments don't maybe necessarily agree, but community-led organizations play a vital role in HIV and TB response. And yet the civic space for these organizations and for others is shrinking really fast across the region. And it's really about the pace. Some countries are not really moving fast in terms of shrinking, which is a good thing in this context, while others are really like steaming forward. And if you look at the report, you will see that there is a special case box for Georgia, once probably the most liberal country in the region, the most advanced and the most free country in the region. And yet now we see the fastest trend of shrinking civic space, where laws are being adopted like so regularly that it's like I don't know which other country could be so fast and so successful in imposing the limitations on civil society. And the last thing is that, of course, the trends that we see, the pressures and burdens that are imposed by the governments, both at the level of laws and also administratively, so basically through enforcement, they undermine public health, they limit and undermine access to services, they undermine advocacy efforts that are led by civil society and community-led organizations alike. The scope of the research, as I mentioned, it was 10 countries of the region. Azerbaijan, Armenia, it's different in Russian and English because of the alphabet. So like in Russian, it's Azerbaijan, Armenia, Belarus, Georgia. No, it's Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Tajikistan, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan. In Russian, the order is slightly different. The period covered is basically 2024 through the end of 2025. We do see continued developments. They are not captured in the report because if we continued capturing them, we would never launch this report. So we had to stop at some point. We had to say like, okay, that's going to be for the next report. Hopefully we will have the support to undertake this exercise once again and see actually how much the situation has changed. And the report looked thematically at 4 key pillars of civic space. These are freedom of association, freedom of assembly and peaceful meetings, freedom of expression and access to information, as well as criminalization of key populations, as well as people living with HIV, and protection from reprisal. And we could see that using the methodology, we could see that, yeah, there is a lot to look at, to digest, and actually to see how we can respond. I will not speak a lot about methodology. I will just say that we had 10 absolutely amazing focal points in the 10 countries of the region who I was impressed by the depth of information they shared. So huge thanks to all 10 focal points. They filled out the initial instrument. Next time it will be a follow-up instrument. So obviously the purpose this time was to set the baseline, and next time we will just see how the situation is changing. But also there was a case documentation instrument, which was also used by a couple of focal points. And basically we looked at whatever is available in open sources, including the laws, bylaws, documented cases. Good thing we at least used to have free media in some areas, so there was some coverage coming in the media, and even now we can see that in independent media these reports, they pop up, and we obviously used them in the report, as well as there were regular meetings where we discussed with the focal points what's going on. The instrument was structured across the 4 pillars I mentioned earlier. And we basically, like, it started with the legal framework and then how it's enforced. There was pretty, like, it was simple, but it also was complicated because every question had a yes/no answer, and sometimes we used not available or not applicable as well. There are not many of those blocks in the report, but we still have to say that yes or no doesn't, it's not like black or white. there are lots of shades of gray. And when you see the tables further on, you will see green or red. Sometimes it's not that green, and sometimes it's not that red. So it's more like a helicopter view picture of what's going on, but then you definitely need to dig in for details because it may be misleading. Okay. So overall, the situation in the region is getting worse, as I said, especially in several countries of the region, such as Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Azerbaijan, and Belarus. And that was through legal and administrative pressures on civil society. In Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, and Azerbaijan, we have new legislation adopted or actively enforced, including the laws on foreign influence, on anti-propaganda, like anti-propaganda laws, as well as child protection laws, protection of morale of, in the society, and, other noble premises basically used or pretext used to justify these measures. But each law is basically aiming to restrict the activity of independent advocates, media, and NGOs. Of course, including the civil society organizations and community-led organizations working in HIV and TB. And this had direct impact on them. Selective enforcement and administrative burdens, it gets worse. It got worse in Belarus, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. By selective, we mean that overall, you're okay unless you deal with sensitive issues like LGBTQI+, or drug use, or some other things that are, very dangerous. So another thing is that clearly there is a process of countries that used to be quite open, like Georgia, but now are becoming less democratic. Georgia being basically a textbook example, but it's not the only one. And of course, these processes affected organizations that are community-led or working with LGBTQI communities, with communities of people who use drugs and other key populations. You can see this is the helicopter view table that I mentioned, and I'm sorry I didn't have the time to translate the questions. The presentation will be updated after the launch, and you will be able basically to see the updated presentation, both in Russian and English, whichever language you prefer. So these are the questions from the instrument. And these are the questions, as I said, first of all, about the laws and then their enforcement. This page is not so red, it appears. But actually, if you look at some of the answers, you can see that there is quite a lot of red. And by the way, you can see that, for instance, here, yes is a green thing, it's a good thing, but here, yes is a bad thing, or here or here. So depending on the question, basically you can see where we raise a red flag and where we raise a green flag. But so far so good. We have only 2 countries that reported adoption of laws on foreign agents. But we have other legislations that affect the work, the operation or registration and financing of civil society organizations. And we do see practices that are not so good for the CSOs and CLOs working in HIV and TB. We can see some red flags here. So some countries are actually, and some countries are consistently good at creating difficult operating environment for CSOs, like Belarus. It doesn't have the law on foreign agents, and that's probably the one good thing about Belarus in this segment. I will not go through all the questions. You will be able to do that when you see the report. But overall, yeah, clearly we have foreign agent and foreign influence laws adopted and actively enforced in Georgia and Kyrgyzstan. We have administrative burdens and barriers in registration, reporting, and day-to-day operation in Azerbaijan, Belarus, and Tajikistan. We have selective application of NGO-related provisions. As I said, they particularly affected organizations working in sensitive areas like LGBTQI+, harm reduction, and human rights advocacy, especially in Belarus and Azerbaijan. Increased pressure in terms of meeting the statutory requirements and inspections. That also created an increased uncertainty for organizations led by communities in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. And overall, yeah, there are clearly expressed limitations and restrictions imposed on the freedom of association during the reporting period in Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Belarus, and Azerbaijan. But these are not the only countries that had that. Is just the most prominent examples. So next one is freedom of assembly, of peaceful assembly. Again, quite a lot of red here. And these are not all the questions. You will see more questions as you read the report and look at the instrument. But these are most relevant, I would say, questions that allow you to understand what's going on. And you can see that the foreign agent laws and other laws, again, they appear. This is not necessarily the foreign agent laws. It could be other laws as well. It could be actually just an NGO law. It could be a law that is actually called like further improving the space, like not the space, but further improving the work of non-governmental organizations. But actually it does exactly the opposite. And in reality, there were also restrictions that are not necessarily in the law. So some organizations were advised or recommended not to go for certain activities, not because they're illegal, but because they're sensitive. And literally that means like you don't do that. If you do that, you will face consequences. This particularly affected the populations we're talking about. As a result, advocacy activity in those countries where they have this going on, it went down dramatically. What we can see is that literally none of the countries has the possibilities like to organize a meeting without getting a permission. Throughout the region, you have to get an authorization for a meeting or a demonstration or a protest. You cannot just notify. So notifying the authorities is not enough. You have to actually get a permission. Of course, very often this result in a rejection, or sometimes you will not get the response until it's too late. So that's also a very popular tactic. This does not necessarily apply to everything that is going on in the country, but like once you touch issues of key populations, gender, sexual orientation, drug use, then immediately you become different and basically you're not allowed to have a meeting. And in general, there are 4 countries that stand out in terms of restricting the freedom of peaceful assembly. Those are Belarus, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. It doesn't mean the others are not there. In some countries, there are no protests or demonstrations because of history. Like in Uzbekistan, there are no protests and demonstrations for a long time. it's been a while since the government made it clear that these peaceful assemblies will not be allowed or tolerated. So next one is freedom of expression and access to information. Again, we have quite a lot of red here, and some countries are consistently red, like Kyrgyzstan. Used to be pretty open, by the way. Belarus, that's not something new, but things have worsened in last years. And here, the main points are that the laws on anti-propaganda, it could be anti-drug propaganda, it could be anti-LGBTQI propaganda, as well as child protection, family protection, public morale protection premises. These laws, they were either expanded or actively applied in two countries of the region, Georgia and Kyrgyzstan, which clearly affected public discussions around LGBTQI community and the rights of LGBTQI plus people. We can see more and more censorship based on considerations of morale, more and more evident in Azerbaijan and Belarus. Information related to harm reduction and gender diversity is subject to particularly strengthened control and informal limitations in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. There is ongoing and expanding regulation of online content and pressure on online media, and not just online media. It's just most of the media is now moving to the online, to virtual space. And of course, this shrank the space for advocacy and human rights communications in Belarus and Azerbaijan. Overall, freedom of expression and access to information were particularly limited in countries where there are both special restrictive laws and also selective enforcement. And that's the situation in Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Belarus, and Azerbaijan. We're coming to the last block, which is criminalization of key populations and protection from reprisal. And we can see quite a sad picture here. There are a lot of yeses in this part. And this is like, is drug use prohibited in the country? Is possession of drugs for personal use prohibited in the country? It's not just criminal liability we're talking about. It's also administrative, which is why it's all red. In some countries, in most countries, it's not a criminal offense, but it's an administrative offense, and that has consequences, such as being put on a registry of people who use drugs, and that, in result, limits the rights and affects the rights of people who are registered as people who use drugs. At the same time, we have pretty much green here, which is about criminalization of homosexual relations. But we have Uzbekistan here, traditionally just doesn't want to decriminalize homosexuality. And based on what's like the public debate, it's not going to happen anytime soon. And yes, there were also cases of criminalization of basically prosecuting people, men having sex with men, but also transgender women who were criminalized in Uzbekistan under the homosexuality provision of the criminal code. But then we also have countries which do not criminalize LGBTQI people, but they actually do. There were cases of threats, there were cases of arrests, there were cases of, persecutions in terms of like in relation of activists and people belonging to the LGBTQI plus communities, which is not a good thing, of course. We saw it in Belarus, in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan. So yeah, not a very happy slide here, unfortunately. And we have more. So yeah, this is the biggest actually chunk, and we have most problems here. We have, look at Belarus and look at some of the questions. It's all red. However, you do need to look at expanded analysis to really understand what's going on in each of the country and what's going on with each of the questions. Okay, but what we can summarize is that we still have really strict criminalization of drug use in Belarus, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, which affects harm reduction and outreach work. We still have criminalization of HIV throughout the region. And by the way, if you look at the table here, we do have countries that, let me see where the question was. Yeah, so this question 4.7, it speaks about intentional or unintentional HIV transmission, non-disclosure, or exposure. And the thing is, we have one country that decriminalized exposure, and that's Ukraine. Oh, Ukraine, sorry, that's Armenia. The thing is, we still have the liability for both intentional or unintentional HIV transmission in the country. So whichever country you pick, there is HIV criminalization, and it's either very rampant or kind of moderate, but we don't have any country where we would have HIV completely decriminalized. So, and all of these countries, they have specific special articles in their criminal codes on HIV, which is not too good. I don't want to say beautiful, even with this, it's just not good at all. Because yeah, several things: stigma, discrimination, and then also disclosure, because criminal record is not secret information, it's not confidential information. So your medical record is, the criminal record is not. So there is basically disclosure of your status whenever there is a case against you initiated. Sorry. Then we have increased legal vulnerability of LGBTQI communities in Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, and Azerbaijan because of the laws on protection of morale and prohibition of propaganda. So yeah, and then we have very weak protection from reprisal for activists and organizations alike, especially in Belarus, Azerbaijan, and Tajikistan. But these are not all the countries where the protection from reprisal is weak. We do have case boxes from Armenia and from Ukraine, if I remember correctly, where there was no protection from reprisal for when there were instances when activists were abused.
Timur?
Also, yes, I'm finishing. Yeah.
Yeah, 1-2 minutes and max.
Okay. So yeah, we have informal pressures, we have inspections as well as threats in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, even though formally these are not allowed. So a very important thing, adaptation. So what we see is basically organizations either adjusting the way they work in order to reduce the risks and threats, especially in Belarus, Azerbaijan, and Tajikistan. Advocacy was reframed so that it sounds neutral, like kind of public health rhetoric, in order to avoid pressures, especially in Georgia and Kyrgyzstan. Decrease of public visibility throughout the region because the organizations are just moving to closed meetings, to very limited online presence and informal channels of providing services. Sensitive topics such as drug use, sexuality, and gender diversity were selectively excluded from communications, not just in these two countries, but particularly in Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan. And a lot of organizations, they just shifted the focus from advocacy to service provision. And what we may also expect is basically organizations getting closed because they cannot survive. So that by itself shrank the civic space. I will not make conclusions. I will not read the conclusions here because I made them already throughout the presentation. But I will say that there are recommendations for the governments, obviously related to changing or repealing the laws, ensuring that the protective laws are actually implemented and enforced, and also ensure the meaningful participation of civil society and community-led organizations in shaping the politics. Recommendations for international donors and partners, which are about increasing or at least maintaining the funding for community-led initiatives in HIV and TB in ECOM region, to integrate civic space monitoring in the mechanisms of financing of funding for public health and development, as well as to support mechanisms of legal protection and reducing the risks for community-led organizations. There is one more thing, which is probably very important, is to use diplomatic tools when restrictive laws undermine the public health outcomes. And the last one is recommendations for civil society and community networks. Yeah, this is basically what we as civil society can do, which is basically improve and strengthen regional coordination and solidarity to document and monitor changes in the legislation and the law enforcement practices, to invest in legal awareness and understanding of the laws, and the capacity building for risk management, to maintain strategic advocacy when necessary, adapting the communications, and also to participate in inter-movement alliances, so that we don't just stay in our small silos. Sometimes they're not so small, but we're still isolating ourselves from the rest of the world, while we can actually benefit from working with other movements, with other advocates and activists. The important thing is that civic space is a public health issue, and it's critical for ending the epidemics of HIV and TB in ECA region. And thank you. I know I went over time. I really apologize, but I hope it was informative. Thank you.
Yes, and it was hard to combine everything in a short presentation. So we are encouraging everybody to read the report. And actually, honestly, we only because we had every quarter the absolutely crushing my mind news about the more and more shrinking some civic spaces which we were trying to save for work of our organizations. We initiated, and thank you for Maria, to our manager of Resilient Project, we initiated quarterly updates about the legislation in the countries. You could find them on the Rise and Decriminalize, our joint webpage, because this report is done by the 5 communities and a lot of communities. I would not say 5, but 4 big regional networks, and we will come to the network presentations further on and to the full. But now I wanted to give a floor to Office of High Commissioner on Human Rights, and actually to Samira Muachi, civic space, the specialist of civic space unit in Office of High Commissioner on Human Rights, to show if something which is happening in our country with civic space, does you see on the global level this implications of what is happening on marginalized group, how this could affect the human rights situation, and is it dangerous, and how do you recall the situation, and what we could use in the global level and the human rights bodies to protect communities and to protect civic space and to protect organizations and activists. Samira?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to apologize because I'm late. I was completely confused about the time. We're not far. I'm in Geneva, but still the small difference of time confused me. But I'm very happy to be with you, and thank you for the invitation. So, actually, yes, I was supposed to do an opening statement, but when we spoke before the meeting, I understood it would be useful for our participants to have some tools and indication about how to work on this issue. So I oriented my presentation on this aspect, and also I will make a reference to the not really to the global level, because actually I looked at what we have done in the region, and I have an example of public report we have on Kyrgyzstan. So I hope it can be also useful to have our perspective. Can I share my screen so that you can see my presentation? Let's try like this. Up. You will tell me if you can see my screen.
Yes, we could
Perfect.
see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so in the report that is launched today, and congratulations really for this study, we can observe that the rights to freedom of opinion, expression, peaceful assembly, and association are placed at the center of the study on the civic space in the region, in particular for marginalized communities and their access to health services. So these rights are therefore shown as good indicators on how to measure and evaluate the state of the civic space based on the information collected by the different organizations and advocates that you gather in the region. And in this regard, I would like to start let's see. Oh, now, yes. I would like to start by referring to an important UN tool for these specific rights that I just mentioned and that are one of the focus of the study. It's about the special procedures of the UN Human Rights Council and the thematic mandates of special rapporteurs. So I'm sure many of you know about these special procedures, but I have selected a few ones for today. And you will find a link on the title that I have indicated to the main page of EHRA webpage. So that we can have, so that you can look at these specific rights that are developed in the study, because what I would like to underline is that the thematic mandates of the special rapporteurs are key for the work of civil society organizations, and they allow human rights advocates to have their voice heard at international level, and they represent a critical source, themselves, the civil society organizations, they represent a critical source of information to advance the work of the UN Human Rights Council. So this is a kind of reciprocal relationship, and all these special procedures, mandate holders, they have a procedure of communications that can be used by civil society actors, that they ensure confidentiality. And this is why I have also indicated the email address of each of one, starting with the Special Rapporteur on the Promotion and Protection of the Right to Freedom of Opinion and Expression. Currently, the expert holding this mandate is Ms. Iran Khan, and I have indicated her email address. The Special Rapporteur on the Right to Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and of Association. Currently, it's Ms. Gina Romero who holds this mandate, and I have indicated her email address, the email address of the mandate. The Special Rapporteur on the Situation of Human Rights Defenders, Ms. Mary Lawlor, is currently holding this mandate, and you have the email address of the mandate. And the Special Rapporteur on the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, Currently holding the mandate is Miss Daleng Mofok. And you also have her email address. So I think, I mean, if the participants to the meeting today haven't experienced yet to communicate with special rapporteurs, it would be really a good opportunity to start. And in OHCHR, we are really available to assist in that sense. Please do not hesitate to contact us. I think we could, I mean, I just would like to remind shortly what we mean by civic space according to international human rights standards. So civic space is, first of all, the environment that enables people, oops, sorry, I have a problem with my slide, that enables people and groups to participate meaningfully in the political, economic, social, and cultural life of their societies. That civil society actors must be able to express themselves freely and in full security and to effect change peacefully and effectively, and that any restriction on this space must comply with international human rights law. So this is why I have included this slide that just to remind that all that international human rights law is within the UN based on international treaties. They are all resulting from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has inspired the elaboration of all these treaties. And I think what is also very important to mention, I will not go into details today because it will be too theoretical. But each country, if one of these, each of these treaties has been signed and ratified by the country, it is important to check whether there is access to to a communication procedure for the committees supervising the implementation of the treaties. We call them treaty bodies. So usually the country has to, after signing and ratifying the treaty, it should also ratify the optional protocol that implement a communication procedure that allows civil society actors to contact each committee and inform on the situation of each of the rights protected under the convention, how it is assessed in the country, and what are the needs in terms of improving the implementation of the treaty. I think it is also very important to see that these treaties, in a lot of cases, include the situation of vulnerable groups and marginalized groups, which is of very relevance for the topic that we are looking at today, in terms of marginalized groups that have been studied in the report, people living with HIV, TB, and other health situations. What also I wanted to look a little bit with you today is the way we monitor the situation of civil space based on international human rights law. I think it's very important to remind that when we look at the rights that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the rights to freedom of expression, the right of association, the freedom of assembly, and also the right to participate to the public life, we need first, as a starting point, to look at the situation in the country regarding the socio-economic context, the rule of law, and the situation of discrimination that all impact the security for those who speak up. So before having access to these rights, it's important to look at the context of these specific elements, and to say, I mean, to consider that when we assess the situation of these rights, for each of them, there are some very important criteria. For freedom of expression, we try to see how easy is the access to information online and offline, how easy is the sharing of information, how easy is it to mobilize others. When we look at the right to participate, we look at the involvement of, we look at the involvement of everyone at all the stages of the participation in public life. We look the situation of elections, and we ensure that the right to participate reflect the diversity of opinion in the country. This includes also the right to privacy that should be protected. And when we look at the freedom of assembly, we look at how the protests and the sit-ins can be organized, the same way for demonstrations, spontaneous assemblies, online assemblies, and mobilization. And for the freedom of association, we look at how we can create associations and the registration rules. What are the social movements and access to what is the situation of access to funding in the country, and how are regulated the social movements. So this is just to show you the different aspects that we look at when we monitor the situation of civic space. I don't want to be too long today, but I wanted to mention some specific reports that can be useful to look at in the framework of this study. There is the report of the Special Rapporteur on the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. The latest from 2024 looks at the drug use, harm reduction, and the right to health. There is the report of the Special Rapporteur, the same Special Rapporteur, of 2025, that is dedicated to health and care workers. And the title of this report is "The Oath Takers and Defenders of the Right to Health." And when I have indicated, these reference numbers, for you, it's easy to find these reports on internet if you go directly, if you put these references number, and you have access directly to the report. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I would like to refer to a recent report that we published, that was published by our office in Kyrgyzstan. It was published on the 18th of December of last year. EHRA looked at the impact of the law on foreign representatives on civil society and its role in supporting the sustainable goals and the principles of Leave No One Behind in Kyrgyzstan. And the findings were based on our work, on the monitoring work of our office in Kyrgyzstan. So the report was prepared based on monitoring that was conducted between September 24 and August 25, covering all 7 regions of Kyrgyzstan. I have put the web link for this report that you can find on our webpage. Information was gathered through a combination of direct interviews. Our office interviewed 104 interlocutors representing 82 civil society organizations, and a questionnaire was distributed to 33 additional organizations. Analysis also was done on the legislation, official documents, government and civil society statements, media and international organizations reports, including UN treaty bodies and special procedures. So while the primary objective of this report was to highlight the chilling effects on CSOs due to the law and overall environment of shrinking civic space in the country. It also indicates potential impact on the country's progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the Leave No One Behind. The report enables further evidence-based dialogue with the government with the aim of slowing down or reversing backsliding on civic space freedoms, specifically freedom of association, expression, and assembly. And it also describes key findings on the chilling effects of the law on CSOs, on how combined effect of the law it has with the negative rhetoric and stigmatization of CSOs, including by officials, increased surveillance from the State Committee of National Security, practices of detention and prosecutions of activists for their exercise of freedom of expression that has led to serious self-censorship among CSOs, civil society organizations. Also a decline in their activities, a retreat from rights-based and watchdog work, and a shift to low visibility service provision without accompanying advocacy.
Samira, I'm sorry, just 1 minute to conclude. Could we do this?
And I think, I was reaching the end of my presentation. Let me just stop sharing my screen. Oh, sorry. I just need to stop. Here we go. Thank you. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate.
Thank you very much. And in the chat, we shared already shared with the special rapporteurs some findings from this report and from the specific in-deep data collected in some of the countries. And I'm sure that we will come back to this. To all rapporteurs further on. That's constant work of all regional networks who are working on this project and report. Eleonora, could I ask you to keep the questions a bit later? I see your question, but that for us it's now important to come to the in-deep vision by communities who are criminalized and in the same time living in this shrinking civic space, funding space. So we will have short interventions by network leadership for different communities, because the general situation is different for the organization working for the specific communities. And we will start from ECOM, and I will give a floor to Zhepariza Zhumagazeva, advocacy coordinator by ECOM. Zhepariza. No, you are muted.
Sorry, thank you so much, Anna. And I will speak in Russian, then I will give a little bit time to everyone to switch to the I don't know which language. Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. My name is Zhepariza. I am advocacy coordinator at ECOM. And I would like to continue focusing on the fact that all the trends and tendencies discussed above and what they mean for our community. When we speak about the civic space shrinking, it mostly affects those who are anyway subject to different kinds of restrictions. And one of the most prominent rights that are restricted is the right for the freedom of expression related to gender identity and sexual rights. And in a number of countries of the region, we have been observing laws on prohibition of propaganda laws on traditional values, and subsequently, these laws become a basis for even more restricted measures, not only against the targeted communities, but the society in general. And countries have already elaborated very well working legal mechanisms that put at risk the work of rights protecting, right defending organizations. For instance, Timur already mentioned the prohibition on homosexual relations, also barriers to registration of organizations, intervention into the activities of the organizations, and the discreditation in media. So what does it actually mean for LGBT organizations? First of all, they can no longer work as usual, do advocacy. There is a risk, a personal risk to their members, employees, and to human rights defenders who work with LGBT rights. We witness shrinking access to funding and self-censorship and withdrawal into invisible work. These are the phenomena that we also observe. Also, the governmental rhetorics in countries identifies LGBT people as a threat to traditional values and identifies and legitimizes violence, creating hatred in the society. This adds to the overall atmosphere of fear, prevents people from accessing governmental institutions for help, and that puts actually the services at risk because the shrinking, sinking civil space also results in limited access to public health. But again, LGBT organizations in the region still try to adapt to the new context, continue providing services to their communities, continue with advocacy to the extent possible in this new context. Our organization also continues to work amid the shrinking civic space, providing help to activists and human rights defenders. And this consistent everyday work, despite all the restrictions, actually enables us to remain sustainable, continue our work to protect the rights of our communities, and actually self-sustain the organization. I'm not now focusing on different countries, specific laws that are adopted in the countries, because colleagues from the countries are going to share this information later on themselves. But that was in very brief some info about what is happening in the region. Thank you for fitting into the 3 minutes. And it's very important that despite the financial restrictions, legal restrictions, ECOM activists still continue to support each other, to submit documents to the United Nations in order to at least document the reprisals. Because today, when the space is shrinking and the so-called gay propaganda laws restrict the chances for work, still people continue to work in their countries abroad, continue providing info to the people about their rights and about their health. Because again, this limitation on the rights is a threat to health, as you correctly mentioned. Thank you, Zhipariza. And
I will give the floor to Irena Molnar, Eurasian Harm Reduction Association Steering Committee Chair, our leader of the network, and the good point good point that Irena is coming from Serbia and know the situation in Eastern Europe and South East Europe. and Western Balkan countries very much. And unfortunately, the situation there not so good. And we could not say in this situation, in this position that West is the best. So Irene, please.
Thank you so much, Gana. And first of all, I want to thank everybody for generating this data and doing this report. I think it's a brilliant piece of research that we as evidence-based organizations do need to use in our future work and advocacy, and also in building the activities and actions to protect the beneficiaries and communities that we work with. So I won't go into findings. And yeah, as you said, I'm coming from Serbia, from a country that lives dictatorship every day and criminalization of many communities. Specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about implications for people who are using drugs, because these are the organizations that we mostly work with and community-based organizations that I originally come from. Because when we think about broadly about shrinking civic space, sometimes for people who are not coming from our communities, it can sound like a legal or institutional issue mostly. And for people who are using drugs particularly, this is very concrete. This has very concrete implications. So firstly, criminalization is already a baseline, as we saw from Timur's report and from all of the charts that we saw in most of the countries that, in all of the countries mostly that are covered, the drug use is penalized in this or any way. Drug possession is penalized as well, or this or the other way. There are registries, surveillance, police pressure. So communities who are using drugs are already operating from a position of vulnerability. And when we add the civic space, shrinking civic space on top of that, this is not a new problem. So this only intensifies the existing problems we previously had. So organizations are exposed to foreign influence labeling or funding restrictions, or become constantly cautious. And because if the anti-drug propaganda are vague, communications about harm reduction becomes legally sensitive and constantly sensitive. And this, for example, I can compare to the Western Balkans as well, because our criminal laws about drugs are very vague. So everything can be understood as, supporting drug use, such as like harm reduction services or anything else. So it's very, it's a constant overthinking about what should we do and how we should do that thing next. So when those things happened, and when the pressure becomes even bigger than it used to be, not necessarily the organizations will close, but they will contract. So they will reduce visibility, avoid certain language, they will prioritize quiet service delivery over advocacy. That also has implications for the future and also for the funding, for the development of the activities, for innovation in it. So organizations naturally, which is normal, invest more in risk management than in mobilization. And why this has consequences? It's because harm reduction depends on trust and visibility, and with the trust with community members and connection in between. So it depends on peer outreach being open, accessible, and legitimate. And if it depends on being able to speak publicly about overdose prevention, substitution therapy, safer use, without fear and without this being interpreted as promotion, which we in Serbia, for example, saw many times. So I can relate closely to this. So another implication of all of this happening is sustainability. So many organizations serving people who use drugs rely only on external funding, and its funding becomes politically stigmatized or administratively restricted. Services become unstable. So also it will finally reflect the representation. So civic space, contracts, community have fewer opportunities to participate in policy discussions, which for a community of people who are using drugs is at utmost importance, because we feel that we need to be in the conversation that happens about us. So it doesn't go without us it shouldn't be without us. So this combination effect is that criminalization used to have isolated individuals, but now shrinking civil space will isolate the organization on its own. And that combination will weaken the entire harm reduction ecosystem and result in the very much impact on public health. So I don't know what is the like how to say. I only can say that I have a positive feeling about this region mobilizing on its own to support communities that are affected by this, because for the Western Balkans did not happen 10 years ago, and now we don't have harm reduction services anymore. So I'm not going to end on the negative note, I'm ending on the positive note, that I see that this region has strength and has community who can support each other. So I believe that this mobilization and this report as a start is a good way to go for future. Thank you.
Thank you. You worked hard to be optimistic, because that's really when the space is shrinking, then organizations are disappearing, and then people who are on the street and who are using drugs, and very different communities of people who are using drugs left absolutely out of the health system, social care system, and protection system, and we have very, very sad and really deadly sad examples from the countries. Okay, maybe Traicha Yanushev from the Sex Workers Advocacy Network will bring us a bit more optimism, but I don't believe it. Traicha, please, our partner, Sex Workers Advocacy Network, SWAN, is absolutely amazing, uniting sex workers, community-based and grassroots organizations to protect and for solidarity. Traicha, floor is yours.
Thank you, Gana, for introducing me, but I think that we agree that Kristina Manicheva will talk on the name of SWAN.
I'm sorry,
Kristina, the floor is yours.
You both here. Yeah, Kristina.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Я буду говорить по-русски. Меня зовут Кристина.
I will be speaking Russian. My name is Christina. I work in the SWAN network, and I want to share about the very difficult changes that we have witnessed over the recent years. So the changes in programs and the overall impact of the shrinking civil space on sex workers and sex worker associations. Of course, the impacts differ country to country, and I want to focus on the most serious, most critical things that we witness in countries where the shrinking happened very fast. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, these are the countries where we used to feel free in the past. The first thing I want to mention is legislative changes. In the recent 2 years, Kazakhstan, for instance, has criminalized some additional things related to sex work in the frames of anti-trafficking legislation, and Kyrgyzstan has introduced an administrative article targeting sex work. Another thing is that the shrinking civil space adds to the limited awareness of the society. So people are afraid to publish information related to sex work, to sex workers, because they are afraid of reprisals and persecution. Another thing is provision of legal aid and documenting of human rights violations. Actually, this work has stopped because sex workers are afraid to voice the violations, and the civil society organizations are afraid to document the cases because these might put them at risk of reprisals. And even if they do document, it is very unsafe to publish or disseminate this information or reports. Funding has shrunk as well, and all the measures that organizations need to take to protect themselves can no longer be funded because there are no resources for them. and organizations can only pursue some very narrow, small, targeted projects because they do not have enough resources to protect their staff, their teams, to protect the organization itself. And most difficult, most critical is that all our efforts to strengthen and mobilize the community have actually stopped now because the community is no longer ready, no longer commit to mobilize, because they can no longer see the horizon of change. And there are a lot of open questions today. That's it, because my time's up. Well, you have not added any optimism, but thank you very much for what you keep doing in very restrictive context and amid the lack of resources. And now over to Medea Khmelidze from the European Women's Network for AIDS, because criminalization of HIV transmission is another threat the communities are witnessing.
Because myself based in Georgia now, not in being in a good condition, not even having the skills of being resilient, as many of our colleagues already had. So I won't repeat much things to stick for the timing. So what we have is highly repressive environment leading to self-censorship, and on top of that, it's like huge funding cuts. Or even if there are money, there are no flexible roads how this money are targeted the real needs of the community. So what we are ending up with, or will definitely end up with the region if going the same way, would be fewer peer navigators, less or no community-led monitoring. That would affect like treatment stockouts, enrollment mechanism, and generally quality of care, seen holistically, like autonomy, social justice, or welfare principle. And what is also important, less legal assistance. Again, contributing to insecurities, and that cycle needs somehow to be, targeted and changed. So what do we have now because of that? It's like weaker enrollment and adherence counseling from the community perspective, reduced psychological support, which is really needed, less protection against discrimination, no women-specific services. All including pregnancy, motherhood, breastfeeding, holistic referral to SRHR services, and definitely no protection from the intimate partner violence, which is really, really important in context of people, specifically women living with HIV. And not to speak about not having empowerment programs, human rights perspective, feminist lens. We're losing all that, which was the core for the bigger improvements. And just one moment to add on, don't think it affects only the communities. The people who think the problem will stay with the communities are so wrong. That problem might knock on everyone's door. And the second thing I would like to mention is maybe the shift for a bit of a donor's perspective. So if you don't have community monitoring tool in place, community-led monitoring, you will not know where your money goes. If you're trying to support specific countries, you won't have the reality. That's something we need to understand, and this is a time for uniting the forces as much as we can and deal with the situation that we found ourselves in. Good thing is we still stay resilient and try to keep on. And again, the driving force is the community. So don't forget about that.
Thank you very much for systematic and a very structured approach, and that's very needed. And we all know in the region, but we need to be very vocal on the cases, like hundreds of cases, I would say, in some country where the data from AIDS Center are just taken to have the indicators of the criminal cases against people who are living with HIV, and that's just incredible. And also with this gender so-called gender ideology, where the now a lot of donors will be forced to follow the US legislation. So the shrinking funding space for us could be absolutely killing our activists and our community. But thank you very much to EWNA for your sisterhood and for your really vivid network and support to each other, and bringing new knowledge and new supportive knowledge, and helping each other as sisters all around the region. I really adore your network, and it's one of the coziest, supportive, and absolutely women leadership network. Thank you for doing this now voluntarily for half a year, I guess, or even more. Thank you. And we are coming to kind of very quick snapshots, or just slides or insights from the countries. And I know that it will be extremely hard for people, because there are plenty of information from countries, really, and we are all caring about all the 10 countries, and not only 10 but more than 20 in our region. But I will give a floor to our absolutely amazing leaders, community leaders and experts, and we will start from Kazakhstan, and I will give floor to Luba Vorontsova to say what is happening very specifically on LGBT propaganda law, but also how do you feel there? Luba.
Hello everyone. I will switch to if you don't mind. Sorry, Palana and effect. Да, я в принципе
Yes,
хочу рассказать вам
I would like to
вот
tell you
про ситуацию в
about the
Казахстане.
situation in
И
Kazakhstan,
в рамках нашей
and
темы, нашей встречи,
within
на
the
примере
scope
одной
of our
инициативы, как
topic,
сужается гражданское
just to give you an example of one
пространство, и
initiative to
как право на
showcase
мирное
how
собрание
this
превращается из
civic
гарантированного
society is
права в
restricted,
которую государство
and
может
how
ввести
the right
незаконно.
for
Да,
peaceful
я хочу
assembly
рассказать
becomes
о
a
феминистском
privilege that
марше
can be
8 марта в
taken or
городе
given by
Алматы,
the
который
state.
проводится
I
с
would like to tell you about the
2016
feminist
года.
march
И
in
тогда
Almaty
это
that
была
has been
большая
happening since
инициатива, несколько десятков женщин,
2017. It was
которые просто
at the
вышли на
beginning
улицы для того,
just the
чтобы
initiative of a few
продемонстрировать
dozens
за
of women who
равенство.
came
Но
out
уже
into
с
the
самого
streets to
начала
speak about
организаторы
the
сталкивались с
female rights
отказами,
and
давлением со стороны России.
equality. But
И в
since the very beginning, they faced
2015-2019
pressures
году
and
марш согласовать не
restrictions
удалось. В
from the
2020
authorities. In
был марш
2018 and
непримиримого
19, we
участия
could not
уголовного
get the permission
соучения.
for the march. In
После этого
2020, we had a
организаторы
200
башкировали.
person strong
И в
march,
том же
after
году, в
which two
2020 году, в нашей стране
organizers
был
were
принят новый
penalized.
закон
And
о
in the
мирных
same year,
собраниях, который
2020, a
формально
new
легитимит
law on
мирные
peaceful
митинги.
assemblies
Но на
was
практике
adopted,
он
which
еще больше
formally
ограничивал
provided
возможность
more
протеста.
opportunities,
Вот,
but in
потому
fact
что
restricted
теперь протесты были
the
привязаны к
protests even
определенным
more, because
местам,
now
и
protests
нужно
had to
было
be
согласовать с акиматом
held in
города
some
в Казахстане,
particular
который
place, and they had to be
в
permitted
2021
by
году
the
впервые был согласован марш.
municipality authorities.
Полноценная
In
регламентация, которую
2021,
согласовали
the
30
first
участниц,
permission
и это
to a
показало нам, что вообще
march
общественное
was given,
гражданское
and we
гражданская
had more than
позиция
1,000
есть
of
в
participants. So
Казахстане,
there
и
is a
он
demand
должен
for
удовлетворяться.
peaceful
Но
expression of
уже в
opinion in
2022
Kazakhstan.
году марш
It
снова
needs to be
запретили под предлогом
met, but in 2022
Вот,
it was
в
prohibited again
2023
because there
году
was
после
sort of
месяцев
reconstruction.
напряжения
In
власти согласовали
2022, after
митинг,
many,
марш
many
опять был отказан. И, собственно, с тех пор
approaches and
заявки
requests,
проведения
they
марша
did not
получают
give us the
Несмотря
approval,
на
and since then we
усиленные
have not been
кампании
able to get
активистов,
permission, despite
феминисток,
active campaigns
общественности,
by
мы давали
activists,
заявки, мы
feminists,
проводили
the general public.
пресс-конференции, мы связывались с
We
международными
submitted
органами.
requests, we
И, собственно,
held press
это
conferences,
дало
we tried to
результат очень
involve
быстро.
international
Хотя
bodies,
никто
but it
после этого
only worked out once in
невозможно было
2023.
провести феминистский
Since then, we have not been able to have a feminist march and meeting in Kazakhstan. And it's not an isolated case. It's not a part of this shrinking space. We see much more shrinking in 2024 in Kazakhstan. They adopted a law on prohibition of the so-called LGBT propaganda, which made even more stigma and self-restrictions in the country. Such measures, they just make us signals about the fact that some topics, some groups, yeah, I know I'm limited in time, must not be visible in the public space. And for us, as the organization that implements the programs in public health, that's a very important part of our work, this visibility, that we need to be visible as people with certain diseases, behaviors, and lifestyles. Thank you. Thank you very much, Luba. I would like to say that when we speak about marches, demonstrations in this region for our key populations, for our organizations, these are forgotten words. Only a few countries really have this opportunity to express something publicly. So all our trainings on advocacy, they finish with just like do this underground without visibility. So that's a self-censoring which has been happening for maybe 20 years. No specific protests have been taking place. We can mention Ukraine, Georgia in old times, and a bit of other countries. But in fact, we have been self-censoring ourselves for years, and we truly respect the women who go to the streets and fight for this march, despite all the penalties and prosecution. That's very important. And we cannot say that everything is fine in Ukraine or Moldova, but there our activists, our sisters are fighting for their right to speak up. Through LGBT march or women's march, that's the fight that we all need. Thank you, Luba. Now we are switching to Georgia. I'd like to give the floor to Marie. I understand that it's impossible to speak about in 3 minutes.
Everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity to monitor shrinking space situation in Georgia and to share information with colleagues internationally and regionally. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I tried to put all the legislations adopted in just 1 year on one slide, but mission was impossible. I could not do it. It's because so much legislations were adopted in just 1 year. Legislation which, for example, Russia and other authoritarian countries adopted in 12 plus years were adopted in very quick way in short time in Georgia. So I just will count some of them. It's foreign influence law and FARA are adopted and implemented parallelly in Georgia. Anti-LGBT legislation with amendments in 14 different laws were, adopted. Restrictions on opposition parties officially restricted in Georgia since 2028 on a legislative basis. Even gender were removed from the law and abolished gender quotas in this short period of time. We also have innovation which called preventive detention. If any person are fined or arrested for protesting, it can be preventively detention without any action, just in preventive measures. So, and unfortunately, Georgia creating mandatory national registry of individuals with mental health conditions, alcoholism, drug addiction, which will be enforced since March 1st, but we do not know yet what this exactly means and how it will work, etc. So yeah, it's since I submitted quarterly reports rapidly so many things changed, and currently Parliament of Georgia, hearing a new package of amendments into different legislation, but mainly in grant legislation. And according to these new amendments, definition of grants will be so wide that everything, absolutely everything, any financial resources, not only financial money, but also training, technical experience, equipment, any kind of experience, etc., will be reviewed as a grant from any individual donor or even entrepreneurship. So, I mean, yeah, it's if I will speak about this legislation changing very rapidly. In terms of positive, I try to find any positive, and as Medea mentioned, we are still learning and shocking because it never happened in Georgia for 36 years of the independence. So, but good news is that we are united very quickly, and even people who never before was in CSO or media now very actively engaged in protests, and protesting continues. More than 465 days, etc. And we submitted a lot of applications to European Court of Human Rights. We are using all international mechanisms, and currently, very quickly, even European Court of Human Rights start hearings, which is good news. And currently, we have in Georgia a so-called Russian mechanism organized by OSCE, which is also unique and very, I hope, powerful mechanism, and will lead to some, results. And yeah, it's a positive thing that we're not stopping. We are continue to, actively engaged in protest on different levels, and only actions lead to results, and I hope we will have results. And just one thing, statistic, after adopting and implementing foreign influence law and FARA, only 1% of Georgian NGOs registered as a foreign agent, and more than 99% of NGOs stop operating or operating on voluntary basis. But with new amendments, even voluntary work will be punished, because solidarity is thing which government can't, violate and can't change among, people, different communities and different, activists. So they will try to stop people with this kind of measures. So yeah, it's very shortly. Of course, it's very hard to speak about all these changes in just 3 minutes. But if you have any additional questions or comments, I'm here and I will happy to answer on it.
Thank you very much for what you are doing. And actually, like 400 days of constant protest, taking arrested friends from the prison, paying fines to the state, and being under threat and being not paid for majority of civil society, free journalists and lawyers being not paid, that's unimaginable solidarity and an unimaginable protest. Never experienced, I could say, in the region for sure. So all our hearts with you.
If I may, just one additional sentence. Because of this protest and unbreakable solidarity, most of legislations which were adopted not implemented yet, or not implemented fully, because resilience of huge society, general society, not only civil society but others as well. So I mean, it's some kind of positive things which I want to mention as well.
Thank you. We are moving to Uzbekistan, and I will give the floor to Oliver for the short update, because we rare hear about Uzbekistan. Oliver.
Спасибо большое. Уважаемые коллеги, коллежанки, если мы с вами будем
Thank you
смотреть
very
на
much, dear colleagues. If we look at the situation in 2024 for Uzbekistan as one single political and right-related process, we see that Uzbekistan continues using one model of control of vulnerable groups through control, stigma, and punishment. But they say it's protection of the public moral or public health. But in fact, the social effect for the groups is the same. They start fearing the state even more, and accessing protection, medicine, and justice becomes even more risky. There are three problems. First, we still have the Article 120, the criminal law, which provides for criminal liability for voluntary sexual contacts between adult men, punishable with up to 3 years in prison. But it's important how it works for the social environment. It's a norm for prosecution even when there is no criminal case. The fact that this article exists creates fear, self-censoring, and threats. People don't go to the police after violations. They don't go to speak about the blackmail. They don't speak about corruption. They keep being invisible. The second policy is the policy to prevent the spread of HIV, which is not about help but about control. There is mandatory testing before marriage, for example. So formally, it's about protecting family, but it's not about voluntary prophylaxis, but about forced disclosure of the status. In 2025, this logic was expanded with a new law on mandatory HIV testing for separate categories of people, in particular people who return after a long stay abroad, those who are going to migrate to work, and for foreign workers who come to Uzbekistan. So the system that should be about safety and help is about threats now, which leads to even more problems with preventing the spread of HIV epidemics. And the third problem is the new drug policy, which uses the rhetorics of the genophont of the nation. This new drug policy, adopted and implemented by the order of the president in November 2025, is all about punishment. Even the name about protecting the health of the population and the genophont of the nation creates a very uncomfortable framework, because genophont nation sounds like legally and scientifically important term, but it doesn't have a specific definition neither in the order nor in other laws. So this ambiguity creates a lot of space for state politics. And in this new policy, they combine strengthening the liability up to 20 years in prison, limiting of the mechanism for early release from prison, and also a lot of work through schools, a lot of propaganda through youth, religious leaders, and so on, that can limit the rights for personal life and create bad conditions.
We can also see that the reprisal policy pursued by Uzbekistan is usually justified by the protection of youth, societal morals, etc. If we summarize for 2025, we can see that Uzbekistan continues to practice pressure on certain communities, criminalizing sexual identity, again, reprisals and mobilization, forceful mobilization of the youth, and sensitive communities are especially unprotected from actions from the government and from the perceptions and attitudes of this society. And today, the criminal code actually undermines the function of humanity, the function of justice in our society, and it is more and more becoming a tool for disciplining and threatening. Thank you very much, Oliver. And this is really a very clear, clear detection and very well formulated situation with the protection of the organizations that support our key populations. Colleagues, unfortunately, we're very much behind the schedule because people have a lot to say. It was very difficult to choose the countries actually to take the floor. But again, those who have comments or urgent questions, please raise your hands and please ask your questions, give your feedback within 30, 40 seconds. And I just wanted to say that this is our first comprehensive report of this kind on shrinking civil space and marginalized populations in our region. We are going and we are already sharing this report on all available international platforms, and we will submit the report to the Commission on Narcotic Drugs within a week. And of course, you can see these very strong conflicts, very strong opposition in and within the countries. And of course, we should not expect a UN committee tell the country, well, this is not something good that you are doing, please improve, and the countries would improve. Of course not, but we commit to documenting all the details, all the cases, hoping that the situation might change in the future, and we need to be protected in the meanwhile. So I think I saw Eleanor's hand raised before. Is it still relevant, Eleonora? Do you want to take the floor or not anymore? I cannot see your hand now. Okay, then yes, it's no longer relevant. I could not unmute myself then, sorry. Okay, thank you. And now today we have a lot of participants from the UN agencies. Thank you so much for your support, from donors. And I want to mention that despite the pressure, we try to show solidarity, to look for resources together. And one of the foundations, the Dolan Foundation, is absolutely brilliant in supporting the initiatives, and it's super important for us to stick together, to demonstrate brotherhood, sisterhood, to protect one another, so that in a very hot and dark night, we would have someone to call, someone to reach out for help to. And again, the ISOS, the Resilient Project, thank you so much. Thanks to our donors for your support. And I also want to, from the depth of my heart, thank all of our donors and partners. You know that all the regional networks, they work with their own donors and partners, but it's very important to hear their joint voice. Timur, over to you. Yes, and I think we need to continue the dialogue with GF, because when GF says that a tool is useful and starts implementing the tool and recommending the tool after that, then the status of the tool actually changes. And similar to what happened previously around stigma, I think the same might happen now. And we need to legitimize this tool, this instrument, as an efficient tool for civil society monitoring, civil activity monitoring. And I think it would be really helpful to find funding later on even funding from the GF itself. Thank you very much, Timur, and we are going to have a separate presentation of this tool, of this report to the GF and to the community as we are discussing the new cycle of applications. So, dear colleagues, I do not want to keep you here for longer because we have a lot of information and we want to ask you to share this report, this information with your peers, with your colleagues. Next year, we will have another survey, and quarterly we will try to update you about this situation. Together with Maria Sketra, our project coordinator, we are trying to look out for good news, for positive changes, in most cases unsuccessfully, but it's very important to stick together. All our joint calls, joint efforts are very hard to undertake, but it is even harder for the communities to live in this very severe context in their countries. So we need to support each other. Thank you so much for whatever you are doing and for investing all your heart into your work. Thank you. Let's continue working and protecting our beneficiaries, our communities. Thank you. Thank you and goodbye. Goodbye and good luck to all.
До свидания, спасибо. Закрывай.